I hope you've been enjoying the research that has been presented so far, the previous sessions. And I hope that, those of you who are joining these sessions have definitely gained some insight based on the research that has been presented so far. My name is Nisha Lachman. I am the NSD Youth and Volunteering Officer attached to the Port of Spain Country Cluster Delegation, which is based in Trinidad and Tobago. And I provide support to the 13 English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean national societies. Tonight, this session is going to focus on new forms of volunteering and digital transformation of volunteering. As you would have noticed, I am going to be presenting in English, but we do have interpretation services available for those for the Spanish speakers who would need to access this. At certain points during this presentation, we will guide you accordingly so that everyone can hear what all of the panelists have to say. Okay, so at this point, I think it's time to introduce our team here today. And I think we will start with Andres.
Hola, qué placer. Mi nombre es Andrés Morales y soy el coordinador regional de desarrollo voluntario de juventud.
Hello, everybody. This is Andres. He is the regional coordinator for volunteering and youth in the Americas.
Okay, Luciana.
She's interpreting, pero Luciana está parte de la oficina regional y ella la interpreta esta noche.
Just to introduce myself as well, I am Luciana.
And then we have our colleague from the Ecuadorean Red Cross, María.
Y ahora presentamos a María de la Cruz Roja Ecuatoriana.
Hola, buenas noches con todos y todas, colegas.
And we also have two colleagues joining us from the Guatemalan Red Cross. Félix, José, whichever one wants to go first.
Hola, buenas noches, compañeros. Un gusto.
Dale, Félix, presentate. Mucha sonrisa en la presentación. Estás en mute, Félix, no te escuchamos. Seguimos sin escuchar, hermano. Sí, no te escuchamos todavía, Félix. Nope. Nope. So we can continue, Nisha, in the meantime while Félix is...
No problem at all. All right, so I see we have quite a few people joining us at this point. So at this point, we want to invite our participants, our audience, to just go to the chat and drop a line. Let us know where you're joining us from. Thank you, Andres. We have Andres joining us from IFRC Americas. All right, I see Venezuela, Panama, Jamaica. Thank you, Adrian. Adrian is here representing the Caribbean. Some more Venezuela, Guatemala, Costa Rica. All right, awesome. All right, so the agenda we have for this session, first we're going to start just with a brief overview of the session, a brief introduction to the topic, which I will do. Then we will move to a presentation from the Guatemalan Red Cross. Following this presentation, we will also have another presentation from the Ecuadorian Red Cross. After these two presentations, we will then move to a panel of discussions, and we do have some questions prepared to guide the conversation. Then we will move to a short question and answer segment from the audience. So guys, get your mics ready. And then we will have a brief closing of the session. Again, a reminder, I will be speaking in Spanish. If you need translation services, interpretation services, please go to the bottom of your screen. On the menu, you'll be able to select, I think we're using Spanish at this point, yeah? Okay. But we will provide guidance accordingly. Okay. Oh, we have quite a few participants joining us from Venezuela. Wonderful. All right, so back to the session at hand. So in this session, we're going to be exploring new forms of volunteering and digital transformation of volunteering. So in line with Strategy 2030 and the vision that is set out for our development, the IFRC recognizes that new approaches are needed to drive global change. I'm sure we're all aware of this at this point, yeah? So we have accepted the challenge to transform ourselves in such a way that we continue to be relevant, attractive, adaptable, and visionary. I'm sure we all agree that volunteering today is not the same as it was 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. Strategy 2030 calls for us to reimagine our work with and through volunteers, and for digital transformation to facilitate learning, intelligence, and action. And then 2020 hit. So the coronavirus pandemic forced us to come to terms with the need to adapt our approach to volunteering. It became a matter of adapt, be flexible, and thrive, or remain rigid and unchanged and lose the strength of our organization. So, with that very brief introduction, I now pass the floor to the Guatemalan Red Cross, sorry. I now pass the floor to the Guatemalan Red Cross, who would like to share with us their experiences so far in developing new forms of volunteering and facilitating the digital transformation of their national society. Go ahead, Félix.
No te escuchamos, Félix. No, tal vez si quitas el micrófono, ¿lo vas a conectar?
Disculpen, ¿me escuchas?
Ahora sí.
Antes de
there was a significant transformation to digital volunteering.
Muchas gracias. Justo Guatemala tenía una brecha digital bastante la única ganadora en Guatemala de esta pandemia que nos afectó tanto fue la
winner in Guatemala for this pandemic
innovación.
was innovation.
De COVID, nuestros voluntarios ya hacían
Since COVID, our volunteers
aplicación del levantado de información a través de teléfonos móviles como de
used to use their phones and apps and things as such
el trabajo de
for their volunteer work.
Utilizando tablets.
They would use their tablets.
Nos ayudó muchísimo el aprender a usar nuevas.
It really helped us to learn to use these new technologies,
utilizar más el streaming, utilizar el
to
aprendizaje.
stream, to use online learning.
Una coyuntura en la cual estábamos introduciendo como sociedad nacional también otras metodologías.
As a national society, we were also introducing new methodologies.
Quiero dejarle el espacio
So I want to leave the space here
es nuestro técnico en sistemas de información.
to José, who's the technician
aplicamos
for information.
tecnología para salvar vidas en respuesta a la operación.
And we use this technology also to save lives and to gather more information about volunteering. So now we can hear from José.
Muchas gracias, Félix. De nuevo, buenas noches a todos. Es un gusto para mí el día de hoy presentar, ¿verdad? Un poco de lo que es el trabajo que he desarrollado, no solo como técnico, sino sobre todo. Básicamente, pues les voy a presentar, ¿verdad? Un poco del trabajo que hemos estado realizando durante intervenciones en emergencia. Tenemos, por ejemplo, intervenciones con la tormenta tropical Julia, la cual afectó al país en octubre del 2022, en la cual pues se activaron delegaciones del Caribe guatemalteco, y en las cuales con los voluntarios, ¿verdad? Realizamos una serie de levantado de información, el cual... ¿Sí? De levantado de información.
Perdón, José, pero que te interrumpa, José. Pero creo que todavía tienes abierto el canal de interpretación, entonces escuchamos, se devuelve el feedback de lo que habla Luciana. Entonces, si quieres, abajo únicamente en interpretación, quítale la interpretación únicamente. Para donde dice audio original únicamente.
Listo, una disculpa.
Okay. So for those also who are listening right now in English, we have interpretation. Please select the channel Spanish. Go ahead, Luciana and José. Gracias, adelante.
Continuando con la presentación.
So we're continuing on with the presentation.
¿Me pueden informar, por favor? Si
As I mentioned, this is one of the results from that was created with the volunteers. This is a geographical information system. As the international movement of the Red Cross, this is one of the materials that is available in almost 192 national societies. You can see here that, for example, there's a map that was developed with the communities that were intervened with the national societies. There's 10 communities here in the yellow points. We can see the communities that were improved with these actions from, for example, wash services or hygiene kits for water. This was completed alongside this risk analysis. So this was developed as well with information that we collected while we were on the field, but also information that we collected or that was received from different organizations or different sorts of sites.
Igualmente tenemos otros ejemplos por acá. Tenemos
Josué, no sé si estás presentando algo, pero solamente se ve como las imágenes en pequeño.
Bueno.
Tal vez tienes otras pantallas o estás compartiendo únicamente, no toda tu pantalla, entonces deberías compartir. Y cuando le das compartir,
muy bien,
pones todo tu pantalla para que se vea la presentación bien.
Listo. No sé si se puede ver ahora.
Momento.
¿Sí se puede visualizar?
No, todavía está oscuro.
Se puede ver ahora.
Ahora sí, adelante.
Muy bien, excelente. Muchas gracias.
So continuing on with the presentation, we can see that we didn't just focus on these emergency services when there's an emergency or crisis in the country. So Guatemala is a country that unfortunately faces diverse types of emergencies, but there's also different types of actions that were completed or that will be completed in a few weeks, actually. Last week, we were in this area in San Marcos, which is this part of Guatemala, where we created this mapping of the communities and the families that we could benefit from these money transfers. We also recorded here the amount of families that were benefited from this. In this map, we can see, for example,
Gracias. Muy bien. Igualmente durante este viaje que hicimos,
during this trip that we made last week with volunteers that were from there, local, we can see that there's 4 communities that will be benefited with these money transfers. Within these symbols, we can see these kind of risks for flooding, for example. You can see it in the legend. You can see that there's a little bit of a spectrum. So there's a low risk and high risk situations. So we can see now how technologies can help us figure out where these communities that are higher risk are and how we can use actions even before crisis or disaster strikes. We can also see that last year we transferred money in this community, which is close to the Caribbean side of Guatemala. We can see here that there's a register of the families that were benefited and attended to. So that there's a bunch of different aspects that we have already seen in the field. This other municipality in Izabal, and there's different kinds of actions on this side as well. This is a different project where we focused on strengthening capacity in preparedness for disasters in these communities of Quiché. We selected these communities based on criteria to see if we could strengthen their capacities to prevent these future disasters. This is another area that has been heavily affected in Verapaz. In this case, we handed out kits of food kits. These communities were selected previously as well. In this other case, we can see that in this side of Guatemala, we have a lot of drought risk. So now we've been implementing a different type of project that focuses on these risks for droughts and preventing higher disasters. In the future, we will also be developing new maps that can help us pre-select these families to benefit. So now we will see a video where we're also just seeing what we've been speaking about here. In this case, we'll see this is called actions based on forced forecast.
Entonces, por favor, me avisan si se puede visualizar.
José, ¿vas a compartir ahora un video?
Sí, voy a compartir un video.
Entonces, cuando pones compartir, asegúrate, cuando te aparece la pantalla compartir, abajo a la izquierda hay un botoncito chiquito que dice compartir sonido o share sound. Tienes que asegurarte de que eso está seleccionado.
¿En dónde es, perdona?
Cuando le das clic a Share Screen, compartir, te aparece una pantalla con algunas opciones. Ahí, abajo a la izquierda, te aparece Share Sound. Abajo a la izquierda.
Bueno, esperemos que sí se pueda. Si no, me avisan, por favor. ¿Sí se puede ver la pantalla?
No todavía.
¿Ya se ve la pantalla, perdón?
No.
Está cargando, José. Pero creo que pesa mucho.
Bueno. Quería enseñarles el video porque
Well, we wanted to
aparecía
see
igual, ¿verdad? Una
the
serie de
video
mapas que nosotros
where
estamos
you could see
realizando en
some
base
maps
al análisis
that
de
were
riesgo, ¿verdad?
created based on
Igualmente
this
una serie de
disaster
fotografías,
risk
lo cual
analysis.
evidencia, ¿verdad?
And this
la
provides us
acción
the
que nosotros
evidence,
pudimos
right, that we
tanto
need
con comunidades
to
beneficiadas
develop these
como con los
actions that we
voluntarios, ¿verdad?
implement into societies
Por
and into
último,
communities.
antes de terminar mi
Before
pequeña
I end
intervención,
this
pues quisiera
presentation,
mostrarles, ¿verdad?
I'd like to show you
un mapping course
a little
que
mapping
nosotros realizamos
course
junto con
that
la Cruz
we
Roja Alemana,
realized with
el cual fue
the
el
German
donante
Red
principal
Cross.
de este
It
proyecto
was
de
the heart of
gestión
this
basada en
project
pronósticos,
that
en donde
that is based on forecasting.
convocamos, ¿verdad? Una serie de
And in
voluntarios
this case,
interesados, ¿verdad? Y
we
que tuvieran
recruited a set of
experiencia
volunteers who
previa
had
en
experience
ya sea
in
interpretación
either
de análisis de
interpreting
riesgos,
this risk
que
analysis
estuvieran motivados,
or
¿verdad?
that were
También
also just
en realizar
motivated in learning and
esta enseñanza,
understanding
¿verdad? Y
what
aquí tengo, por
all of this
ejemplo,
disaster risk analysis meant.
página en donde
So
nosotros
here's a
realizamos
page where
la
we
capacitación, ¿verdad?
kind of
Por
run
favor,
this
igualmente me indican si
learning
se
course.
puede visualizar.
Ahora sí.
Muy bien. Entonces, pues este curso de
So
elaboración
this
de mapas,
course
pues,
to develop maps
fue su edición piloto en donde yo
was,
participé por primera
so
vez.
this one in particular
Luego,
is a pilot.
en la primera y segunda
He
edición, pues
worked
ya
on the
se
first and
añadieron a una
second
serie
editions
de voluntarios, ¿verdad?
with a
Fue un
series of
pequeño curso.
volunteers.
Fueron más o menos como 2
It was
meses
around
en
2
donde
months of
nosotros
work
compartimos una serie de temas.
to
Entonces,
develop
por
these
ejemplo, aquí se mira
thematics
la
and
colección de
these collections
datos,
of data,
los instrumentos para la evaluación de
as well as
riesgo
the
y la
instruments that were
vulnerabilidad,
used, the
un
methods,
entrenamiento
the
básico en
materials
sistemas de información
for all of this
geográfica.
geographical and mapping
Tuvimos
information.
también la generación de mapas de utilidad
There was
para
also
la
the
Sociedad
development of
Nacional.
mapping that
Y el
were used
último módulo,
for
el cual trató
utility for the
acerca de
National
mapas de
Society
intervención y
and
acción
maps
basada
that
en pronósticos.
sort of showed interventions.
Entonces, al final tenemos
So
ya
at
un
the end,
pequeño equipo, ¿verdad?
we have
Conformado
this
más
little
o menos por
prototype
unos 8 o 10
with around 8 or 10
personas de la
people
Sociedad
from their
Nacional, las
National
cuales
Society
estamos
that
capacitados,
we
¿verdad?
have
Y
trained for this
igualmente se les da
purpose.
el apoyo remoto cuando requieren
We also provide
por
remote
ejemplo,
help when it's
apoyo
necessary.
para
So
mapear
for
alguna
example, if you want to
comunidad,
map out a
generar
community
análisis de
to create
riesgos,
these risk
necesitan saber
analysis,
la ubicación, por ejemplo, de
or
ahora que
just to
viene
collect
la
data or
Semana Mayor, le
information.
decimos
For
nosotros
example,
acá,
in this
estamos
case,
realizando una serie
we are developing a series
de generación de puntos para
of
ver
point
en dónde
generations
ellos van a
where
establecer sus puestos de socorro y
where we
atender las
can
necesidades de
place
la población
people
civil
that do rescue services, for
durante
example.
estos días de
And
vacaciones.
so this will help us
Creo
sort
que
of
hasta acá llega mi
organize people
presentación.
when it comes
Estoy a la
to
orden.
the
Muchas gracias
upcoming
nuevamente
vacations and holidays
por
that
la
are coming up.
participación y es un gusto. Feliz noche.
And so that has been the end of the presentation, and thank you very much.
Gracias, José, muy amable.
So thank you, José.
José es parte de la Dirección de Gestión de Riesgos a Desastres.
José is part of the
Específicamente en estos proyectos de acción anticipativa,
analysis for
ha
disaster
contribuido
risk,
con su profesionalismo
and he works a
a
lot
tomar
on this
medidas,
forecasting
utilizando las nuevas tecnologías y
and
también
developing these
a la
new
capacitación y
technologies
formación de los voluntarios que,
with the
como
help
tal,
of
es la mayor
volunteers,
atribución que la
so
institución
that
puede
we
dar a
can
los
really get all the benefit
Gracias, José.
out of these technologies as a national society. So thank you, José.
All right. Thank you very much to the Guatemalan Red Cross for that presentation. And great job on the development of that mapping course. It looks very interesting. It was great to hear how the National Society was able to keep volunteers engaged in local action and updated on the needs of the communities using the technology that the National Society was able to use. Of course, I encourage you all to share what you've learned so far in this process on our volunteer development platform, because it's a chance for other national societies to learn what you all have been able to achieve so far. In the Americas region, a lot of us face very similar challenges. And this is one of those opportunities where, we can have some peer-to-peer support. And other national societies can learn from the advancements that you all have been able to make. So thank you again for that presentation. I now pass the floor to Maria José of the Ecuadorian Red Cross, who will share with us her national society's experiences. Over to you, Maria.
Adelante, María José.
Gracias. Hola nuevamente a todos y todas. Enfocándonos en el tema.
So hello, everybody.
En el tema.
So now focusing in on the thematic about the new forms of volunteering and these transformations into digital volunteering. It's also important to mention that these new forms of volunteering are done through this digital transformation itself. The Ecuadorian Red Cross has implemented a lot of different types of tools that have allowed these spaces for participation for volunteers to be expanded. And now we will see a different presentation.
Denme, por favor, un segundo. No me deja compartir pantalla, Andrés.
Tienes el derecho de co-host abajo donde dice compartir pantalla.
Ahora, ¿me confirman, por favor? Listo.
Sí, adelante.
Listo. Entonces vamos a hablar un
So we will be speaking about these tools that the Ecuadorian Red Cross has been using to benefit volunteering. So there's three really big tools that we have been using. So the first one is the platform for volunteering, e-learning, this app, and this database that handles volunteer information called CPOI. So the APP, so the app, it consists of two different profiles. In these profiles, we are able to share a lot of information about what the National Society does to this external audience. We also count with a team of volunteers that allows us to have this app work really in a very communicative way so that we understand also the actions that have been completed, but they also have their own profile. They can modify it. There's an online area where all of this information sort of sits and is available. There's a lot of different information there. Policies, documents. So a volunteer now has access to all of these policies and documents without having to go to a branch in person. So now they can have it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in the palm of their hands. So these are the QR codes that have been developed so that you can develop, so you can download, excuse me, the app. So this has been a tool that has been working very well to reach the volunteers and to have a direct communication with them from our organization team and our operations. Continuing with these tools that have allowed us to strengthen our volunteer capacities, the Ecuadorian Red Cross has created this e-learning platform that is based on the needs of the National Society. There's around 35 courses there that are at the moment there. And it also allows us, well, it allows the volunteers to have these courses to be trained at any moment that they wish. Again, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So there's different types of things here. So there's online evaluations, scoring, and so everything is in real time, all the scores, everything. So in this example, we can see how a certificate is formed when a training is completed in specific courses. And what is really special about these tools is that all three of them are connected. So what does that mean? So if I complete this course here, the APP information also gets updated. So in the app, you can also visualize what has been happening in this online courses. So they're all three of them are connected. And so what is done in one is visible in the other two. Now we speak about this database for volunteer information called CIVO at the Ecuadorian Red Cross. This tool already has around 10 years of existing, and it has been creating and eliminating different types of functionalities depending on the different kinds of needs that are needed for the National Society. There's different kind of modules in it, and information. So for example, you can see here that there's the information about how many volunteers are at each branch and at each territory. There's also a system that reports at real time through these graphs and these charts, all this volunteer information. How many activities have been completed? Do they have an ID? All these kinds of activities that they have completed within their own National Society. What kind of awards have they received? All this information at a national level is available within this database. So for example, in this picture, you can see that there's different fields. And specifically, you can see a little green bar there and a little red one. So this system helps me visualize the volunteers that have completed a certain task since the moment that they started within the first 6 months of their volunteering. So within those first 6 months, they will have a little orange block if they haven't completed any of their tasks. And the red block here indicates that a volunteer has not done any activities for the past year. So this helps us have a follow-up and a little bit of a trajectory of what the volunteer has been doing over time. So there's also this profile section with all the personal information from the volunteer. And as I said before, everything that you've done in the other two tools that we showed, the app and the online training course, is also visible in this profile. So this is also a good tool for the volunteer to also keep up with their own work and see what they have been doing. And it also allows us to diversify volunteering. And it allows us to sort of rethink volunteer participation in our national society. So as I said before, these three tools are connected. And what is done in one is visible in all the others. And so now our volunteers also have access to all of their information at all times. And so these tools are personal for them and for the Ecuadorian Red Cross to strengthen this volunteering at the national level and to generate these new forms and methods for volunteers to participate. So if there's any questions, the field is open. The floor is open, excuse me.
Do we have any questions for Maria, Jose? Okay, maybe not in this moment, but soon. I expect they will come. Thank you so much for that presentation. The National Society definitely embodies what we say, knowledge at your fingertips, right? And I can definitely see how these advancements would benefit the volunteers themselves. I don't know if you all know this, but what your National Society, what the Guatemalan Red Cross and others have been able to achieve, it serves as inspiration to us in the Caribbean, especially to our volunteers. Because when they have the chance in platforms such as this, in sessions such as these, to just see, what is possible, what other national societies have been able to develop using the skills, using their resources. It's very motivating. And there have been times when, they would be exposed to the systems that you have created, to the apps that you've created. And then they come to us and say, did you see that amazing app? How can we get something like that as well? So it's very much inspirational, and I thank you for sharing. What you've been able to achieve so far. At this point, we are going to be moving on to the panel discussions. And so I would invite Andres to support me in this area.
Muchísimas gracias, Nisha. Muchas gracias, María José, Félix, Josué, por estas buenas presentaciones que nos hacen recordar también cómo tenemos que evolucionarlo. Y eso es algo que hemos estado viendo de parte de los resultados también de análisis del voluntariado de Juventud de las Américas, donde los mismos voluntarios no es que nos exijan que tengamos que adaptarnos, es que los voluntarios están adaptados. Nosotros somos los que muchas veces estamos detrás.
So what Andres is mentioning here is that at times, sometimes the volunteers have already adapted when we haven't adapted yet. And so us, as this big institution, sometimes we're quite slow at adapting when the volunteers are already stepped ahead. And so we're still thinking about how are we going to get there. So this is something that's a reality. And it's not that we have to evolve. It's about connecting with the volunteers who have already have the answers. So first, we're going to start with some questions, starting with the experiences of the pandemic. So during the pandemic, we had to leave behind the idea of being in person in these situations and volunteering. And we can see that in some volunteers, well, it's visible in studies that there was a lot of change, and there was now a virtuality where volunteering became more virtual. So what about that experience? What about that moment in the pandemic? What tools that were developed then have stayed behind? And was there anything in the National Society that during the pandemic that you learned, that you said, well, this stays or this evolves? So for example, the platform that was presented that has years of existing, how was it affected by the pandemic? So recently, So this question is very general, but it also sort of takes off from your personal experiences during the pandemic and how these this has changed flexible volunteering.
Adelante, María José.
Voy yo. Sí, justamente nuestro sistema de gestión de información de los voluntarios.
So the database for volunteer information has a lot of years of existing. And so the pandemic left us this lesson about adapting to a new life. And it's also the case that the other two tools that were presented, especially the app and the e-learning platform, there was really no way to strengthen volunteer capacities in this in-person way that we were used to doing. And so we created these tools so that the pandemic or any other situation that could come along wouldn't stop us from strengthening these capacities in volunteers and giving them their training. And so the APP, the app, is not really like you're there in person where you're there with the volunteers. And so these are tools that are created exactly to sort of reach these challenges, just like the pandemic. So these are platforms that are born from these adversities, but they're also situations and tools that we want to maintain because they become these useful alternatives for volunteers to access. So now they have everything, right? So they have these digital tools that allow them to access information, and they also have the option to be there in person. If we were to return or have another situation like the pandemic that we obviously hope wouldn't happen, now we're ready, especially when it comes to dealing and attending to volunteer needs.
Muchas gracias, María José. Félix?
So first to congratulate María José for all of the effort and the systematic work that has been coming in. This is very important to reach our goals, our humanitarian goals. This is really a marathon kind of effort. And all of these deliverables are really based on the needs that the volunteers have, right? So this is really wonderful to see. In our case, really the evolution has been focused more on the external beneficiaries, but there's also both perspectives. How do we improve the quality of life of the people in our communities, but also strengthen this institutional image and strengthen the capacities of our volunteers? So in the case of the Guatemalan Red Cross, even though it's been fairly few years within the context of the post-pandemic world that we're still trying to get over, the technological advances have been quite significant. So how they have affected these emergencies, these disasters, these new tools have helped us save lives. And so our volunteer profiles include these kind of technical skills and to belong to these communities. And now, in addition, using these mapping, this mapping that was developed by the Guatemalan Red Cross is also a helpful tool. So it helps us strengthen the capacities of our communities and reach really the most vulnerable and the highest risk in these situations in Guatemala. We have a bunch of different threats. There's volcanoes, droughts, hurricanes, earthquakes, and droughts as well. And so this is also magnified by climate change and, La Niña and these meteorological patterns. And so as a national society, we also want to make sure that we can use these forecasting to save lives. And we need to keep adapting and taking up these new technologies that become available to improve our skills and our capacities. So when this was created, it felt futuristic. It felt, you know, like this new world of socialization, but we really never imagined, for example, like the pandemic. But we've been able to adapt to really based off of the needs of the people. So complementary context, right? Work and how it connects to this digital transformation, and through us, but also through the volunteers. So we see some of these comments in the chat. Some people say that they want an app like the one that at the Ecuadorian Red Cross, but really, this might not be so easy, right? So I hope that now we can share some of the challenges that you faced in implementing these kinds of actions and these kinds of tools.
Félix o María José, abierto.
Bueno, vamos en el orden, entonces. Ya estábamos. Bueno, sí, el tema de las herramientas, sin duda, es un reto.
So when it comes to these tools, there's big challenges to consider. And I think perseverance is the first component that you need to develop these tools that will really benefit volunteers. Perseverance, consistency, to be there, to promote it. And then there's this commitment from governing bodies, managing bodies, so that the functionalities of these apps, for example, are really in line with the needs of the community and the national society. And so from all different perspectives of the volunteering, be it governing bodies or other types of functionalities that we use with volunteering, really will be the biggest challenge, right? To make sure that they all connect. The perseverance is important. At the beginning, there's really not that many downloads in the app. For example, we have to keep promoting it. So hand in hand comes this commitment from these governing bodies to really want to implement them. So it's not just about, okay, we've approved it and that's it. It's really about the president, for example, every single opportunity he gets, he will promote this app or these tools. And this really gives it the impact and the importance that these tools have and need.
Gracias, María José. Y mencionas esto, ¿no? Que hay que tener esa perseverancia.
So we mentioned here the perseverance and the follow-up and really following up with the tools. So this is not simple, and it also requires us to adapt, to come up with these quick solutions and problems that require quick solutions. These are problems that require quick solutions. So sometimes adapting the changes that we need to implement these new tools is very difficult. Sometimes we have to get rid of these habits that we already have. We have to, choose these beneficiaries in a different way that we're used to. Before we used to do it in a different way. And so now, before there was these long lists, and now we are allowed to do it much quicker. And obviously with the support of the Federation, we've been able to evolve this kind of relief. So that's the challenge. The challenge is really about to change mentalities. So that's still that's still valid, right? We have to have, it has to come from the inside. We have to change our mentality to adapt to change, and also to collaborate with these other agencies who already have more advanced technologies, because it's true. We have to be proud to be the Red Cross and all these types of things, and all our strength and this kind of brand loyalty, but we really have to be humble in how we deal with our own tools and how we can grow. And so what's mentioned here, hand in hand with what Maria José mentioned, you know, sometimes we can't keep doing the same things over and over again, right? And expect expect a different result. And so sometimes we kind of get stuck in trying to do the same thing because that's what we did before. That's how it worked before. That's how we always did it. And so we need to have the opportunity to stop, right? And that doesn't mean that we stop doing the things that we've done before, especially the good things. It's not about, oh my gosh, now everything's digital, right? It's not just about that. It's about how we can use in a complementary way the same options that our very volunteers are telling us to implement. Maybe before to do some sort of deliveries, you would bring a truck in, you would bring the volunteers, you would bring the things, and you would just hand them over, and that's it. And that was perfect, because what was the goal? To give this humanitarian help. But now, national societies are giving help using drones, for example, or through apps. Now we can figure out how we can reach communities directly, because the community moves with them, right? Now it's almost like a Red Cross Uber, or like Red Cross Uber Eats. So what's the goal? The goal is generally the same, right? To give this humanitarian aid, but it's how we transform with it is also really important. And not everything, especially related to digital volunteering, means that we are just on the internet now, but it's also about how we adapt to different types of tools that become available. So in that kind of perspective, so in that perspective, we have also different people here who are in different national societies. And so let's open up the floor to you and see if there's any other kind of questions or have any comments to María José and Félix about their experience and what they've presented here today. So if anybody wants to speak, so Sergio will tell us a little bit through chat. So what's the progress for integrating new volunteers? How much time is required to become part of the movement? And which are the requisites to make sure that you complete for participation and training? So we are still talking about these digital tools. So there's two different ways that volunteers get recruited into the Red Cross. So you can go in and physically hand in your application, but there's also an alternative where those who want to become volunteers, there's a kind of a pre-register system through this database system. So once you have this pre-registered, now you have access to these e-learning platforms. And so this allows even prospective volunteers to have this introduction into volunteer training. So there's 7 courses that now have become mandatory for those who want to become volunteers. And these trainings are really important to be completed right before activities anyway, so that they can develop as volunteers. So these processes will vary depending on which branch they would like to join. So for example, there's branches where their training process is 3 months long. But in other branches, for example, it will be just 1 month or 2 months, depending on how many volunteers want to join and also depending on how the dimension of the territory. So if it's a bigger area, if it's a smaller area, so there's different kinds of contexts that are analyzed. And based on this information in these contexts, that's how we create these courses. So at the moment, the Ecuadorian Red Cross is also working on creating a training center that will help us standardize this training, and it will integrate all of these 24 branches to kind of create this school of volunteering so that everybody can have this kind of same curriculum within this process for training volunteers for their integration into the movement.
Muchas gracias, María José, por responder la pregunta. No sé si hay otra persona
So,
que desea hacer
if there's
alguna
anybody
pregunta o
else
comentario,
also who would
antes ya
like to make a
comenzar a
question
hacer el cierre
before we
de
close
esta gran sesión.
the session.
Pueden levantar la mano también si desean hablar directamente en el micrófono o pueden escribir la pregunta en el chat.
So you can speak in the microphone if you wish, or write it in chat.
Ok. Viendo esto, en este momento deseo, antes de pasar a Nisha de nuevo, para que nos ayuden en esto, nada más agradecer directamente a Félix.
So before we close, we want to directly thank María José, Félix, also for their amazing presentations, for the comments, and also how we can be visionaries. We also want to thank José to see how can we predict the future? How can we adapt to the future? So Henry Dunant was a visionary in his era. So now we're kind of called for that adapting and for seeing the future, if you will. So thank you for the comments, and now we're back to Nisha for the closing.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much. Just to echo Andres and saying thank you to our panelists for joining us, for being willing to share the experiences of your national societies. As I said before, you might not know it, but you're an inspiration to us all. So please keep up the great work, keep sharing, keep showing us what we too can achieve. I know it's late for some of us. So I just wanted to say again, thank you to the panelists, thank you to the participants, thank you to Andres and Luciana for co-hosting. This session has been great. Of course, the long night of research continues on. Not for me, I'm heading to bed. But this has been great so far. I'm not sure if the previous sessions, we would have had a session earlier today on the baseline studies, as well as a session on the volunteer development framework. I assume those might be made available online, the recordings for them. Of course, please feel free to check them out. I know some of you would have already been there in those sessions with us. But of course, share with your peers. And just one last plug, please continue to visit the volunteer development platform. Help us to build the library of resources that we have there. As I mentioned before, peer-to-peer support is critical at this time. And it's really a way to help other national societies move forward so that we're all being visionary together. All right, so I think that's it. We are at the end of the session. Thank you all again, and have a great night.
Thank you very much, everyone, for the great presentations. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Luis. Bonne journée.
You too. Good evening, good night.